Welcome to the Infinite Wealth Podcast. I'm Cameron Christensen, along with our co-host Anthony Faso, and we just interviewed a much smarter, more handsome Anthony Brister. He is a business and tax attorney. Anthony, any takeaways that you had?
Yeah, it was few. Is always interesting. We talked a little legal, a little tax, and some infinite banking.
Yeah,
And
trifecta.
yeah, and he even talked about some tax deductions that most business owners are afraid to take, myself included. All right. So after talking to him, good thing I didn't file my tax return yet. So I'm going to go evaluate that. And again, it's always, we talk a lot about infinite banking, but it's always like you and me yapping.
Yeah.
Right. But it's kind of
More
nice
so
to
you.
hear somebody else, or particularly an attorney, and how he's using it. And what I think is interesting, he's used it multiple ways, but he's using it to invest in the market. And I know we kind of, we not kind of, we do bash the market quite a bit, but this just shows there's infinite ways to use this policy. So if you know what you're doing, whatever that investment is, we encourage you to do so. I think most of the time people are just not really investing in, Cameron, you like to say speculating, where they're just kind of guessing in the market. But good to hear how he's used his policies. Cam, what takeaways did you have?
Great interview by Anthony Brister. There's two big takeaways I had, and I shared them right at the end there as we're wrapping up. The first one was I really appreciate his approach to the business side of it, is he's not looking to create this huge book of business where his just totally consumed. Is what he's looking to do is find specific clients and build a relationship, right? He wants to make sure that those few that he has are very successful, and that's building a relationship, meeting with them often. So that was a big takeaway for me. The other side of it was what you kind of alluded to, is that on the tax side of it, he's very proactive. He's out there giving suggestions, giving advice, and saying, hey, let's meet. Let's make sure that we're implementing these strategies. And you don't find that very often. So hope you guys find some value in this interview. Again, we interviewed Anthony Brister. He is a business and tax attorney. He received his BA of Finance in Arkansas at Henderson State University, then received his JD in Tax LLM at the University of Houston Law Center. He has extensive experience working with high net worth individuals and business owners. He specializes in tax prep and planning, entity structure, business risk management, and complex estate planning. Anthony loves working with business owners to create asset protection strategies and help them grow their business to create generational wealth.
Enjoy the episode.
Take care. If you're an investor or want to be an investor and you're looking to create passive income that exceeds your monthly expenses, then this is the podcast for you. Here on the Infinite Wealth Podcast, we combine the philosophies of Robert Kiyosaki's Rich Dad Poor Dad, along with Nelson Nash's infinite banking concept. Welcome to the Infinite Wealth Podcast. I'm Cameron Christensen, along with our co-host Anthony Faso. And I got to tell you guys, we're excited to welcome Anthony Brister. He is a business and tax attorney on our show today. We're going to dive deep into estate planning. If you guys have some questions, get those ready because we're going to have all the answers for you today.
No pressure, Anthony. You just got to answer all the questions.
Everything that's thrown at you. Anthony, welcome, man.
Thanks, guys, for having me. And just before, anything that I say is not legal advice and should be taken generally.
Yeah, perfect. We should have a disclaimer like on every.
We should.
Yeah,
that's good advice from the attorney.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, Anthony, welcome, man. Is for the listeners that don't know you, share a little bit about your background.
Yeah, so I got a degree in finance undergrad. I played football at a university called Henderson State. Played offensive line, defensive line for 4 years. Recently married, going on 2 years, to my beautiful wife, Amber.
Congrats.
Got my law degree at University of Houston, along with a master's in tax law. My business really is cradle to grave services for entrepreneurs and high net worth individuals. So anything from starting a business all the way to passing it down to your heirs or selling it, and then everything that comes in between, whether it's a bookkeeping, tax prep, or ancillary legal services.
Anthony, there's a couple things in there that I'll highlight before Faso jumps in there. Is that
and takes over.
offensive line, defensive line? Man, I love offensive linemen, defensive linemen. They're in the trenches. They're out
Yeah.
there grinding it out, right? They don't need a lot of accolades. They don't need a lot of attention. They just in there getting the job done. What was it about kind of estate planning that drew you originally?
So estate planning really is important to me. My mother passed away when I was 10 years old.
Mm.
My father had left at a real young age when my brother was born. So she didn't have a will. There was actually a big custody battle, and we didn't get to go to her funeral. So for me, estate planning is very important, especially for those who have minor kids. Um, Name your guardians, because I pretty much got the worst case scenario, right? And that can be completely avoided by just getting a document in place.
Cameron, I'm glad you answered that question, because I'm more of like, hey, let's get into the tax planning and all this stuff. And like the why is very important. So I could see why you are so passionate about it.
Is that a compliment on air? I love it.
To Anthony.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
No,
No, that
yeah,
was
to you,
to me.
whatever,
That was to me.
whatever.
I'm taking it. Yeah. You got a question? You're
Yeah,
just gonna
first mistake.
you're just gonna tell me how great I am.
Well, then, all right, let's get into it. A lot of our clients are owning some real estate, right? So they have some equity in their properties. What are some ways that they can protect the equity in their investments, but also make sure it doesn't bleed over to their other assets?
Yeah, so I think there's different levels to it. Um, First things first, you want to make sure when you're signing any type of lease that you're doing it appropriately, and you want to make sure to have a LLC if you've got a rental property. And the biggest mistake I see with people is they'll go form an LLC in Delaware, Wyoming, something, or Nevada, and then their property will be in Texas or South Carolina. So when you've got a rental property, you want your LLC to be registered in whichever state that property is, or else it's not going to do you any good from an asset protection standpoint. So that's really the number one level of protection.
Mhm.
Making sure your LLC have an LLC and making sure that it's registered in the right state.
Okay, so that LLC, one of the issues, Anthony, is oftentimes we have a mortgage, right? And so we can't, we buy the property in our personal name. Can we just move it into an LLC?
Yeah, you can. So typically, you can do what's called a warranty deed.
Hmm.
And essentially, what the warranty deed does is transfer your ownership to the LLC, but doesn't affect the bank's rights. Um, that's a special warranty, not a general warranty deed, but that's the way to do it. Typically, when you buy a property in your personal name, you're going to get a better interest rate.
Hmm.
So, people do that all the time. As long as the ownership's not changing, the bank's not going to have an issue with that.
Okay. All right. So that LLC will protect that equity. Is that all we need is an LLC?
So again, it depends on what level you're at. For one property, maybe just an LLC will do the trick. Now, if you've got multiple properties, I think of an LLC as a bucket of risk. So the risks that you have in there are tenant issues, right?
Hmm.
Also, how much equity do you have in that, and how much you want to fill that bucket up? Um, Also, just having an LLC filing with the state, that's not going to give you that protection. So there's other formalities that you want to be sure that you're doing, like having meeting minutes, um, filing your annual registration each year with the state, having a company agreement and following it, having a bank account that's separate. All of these little things, signing your lease agreement under the LLC, all of these little things add up and give you that protection. The LLC in the state where you're registered, that's level one. Now, once you start buying multiple properties or you've got different properties in different states, there's something called a charging order protection LLC, which a couple of states give you protection from, there's two different types of liability that we've got when having an LLC. There's inside protection. So that's your tenant risk, things that happen in that LLC and preventing it from going to you. But also there's the outside protection. So, um, driving down the road, getting in a car wreck, you want to protect that LLC from yourself. So the charging order protection LLC can do that. And that's where the Wyoming, Delaware, Nevada LLCs make sense. But that LLC is not doing business. It's holding your other LLCs.
Okay. Well, so that's for real estate. What if we have a business?
Yeah. So on the business side, it depends whether you're passive or active. We want active income typically to go through an S corporation, especially if you're making over $50,000 net. The reason why is you can avoid self-employment tax, which is Social Security, Medicaid tax. Um, if you're just out there doing business, getting active income, you're paying 15.3% on all of your earnings up to 165,000, more or less. And then there's Medicaid tax and the additional Obamacare tax once you reach a threshold. So that S corporation is where you want your active business, and then you have your passive income over there, either in your charging order protection LLC or in an LLC where it's doing that business.
Anthony, is one of the questions you kind of answered there is we've got a lot of clients that are just getting started, right? We've got a lot there that are out there that have been investing for a while, but some of them are getting started. When should someone start to engage with an estate planning attorney? What's a good trigger or a life event?
So I think every adult needs some kind of estate plan. Really, and it was not just when you die, but what happens if you get in a car wreck and you're unable to make decisions. So when we're doing estate plannings, I'm really thinking about 4 documents at least. We've got power of attorneys, which are medical and durable. Medical covers if you're unable to make decisions, who's going to make those medical decisions for you. Then we got the durable power of attorney, which is who's going to make these financial decisions and carry on your financial affairs. So those 2 documents, anyone over 18 probably should have that in place. So that's for everybody. Now, you don't need an attorney to get those power of attorneys done. So, you can get those online, usually at your state website, something like that. Once you actually have probatable assets, so real property, potentially brokerage accounts, things of significance, that's when you start thinking about talking to an attorney and either getting a will or a trust done.
What about when you have kids? Does that come into effect?
Yeah, like I said, if you have minor kids, you definitely want to have an estate plan. If at the least you're naming who the guardians are, who do you want to take care of them? You want that to be someone who you align with morally, values, all of that. Otherwise, the state's going to get to decide what's the best interest of your child, and that may or may not be what you want.
Yeah, if you don't create your own estate plan and you pass away, then the government will do it for you.
Yep. So they've got a predetermined statute. Every state does, and if you don't have anything, the state statute is going to control.
And oftentimes, how many times maybe you don't want maybe your parents or your wife's parents to really be the guardian. Maybe it needs to be a third party. And if you really want that to happen, that does need to be documented. And then here's one thing that I've learned from experience, fortunately from a friend, not from that happened to us, but the mother was ill, terminally ill, didn't want to talk about, it gave her the creeps to talk about what she wanted or her last wishes. And then the problem was she was on life support and nobody knew what she wanted.
Yeah.
Did she want to stay on it? Did she want to take off? take it off. And what happened, the burden went on the kids. And unfortunately, the kids could not decide. And so one of them had to make the decision, and she felt that mom did not want to be on life support. And the problem is, not only did that create strife in the family, but really to this day, she has guilt. She logically knows mom would have wanted to be off life support, but she doesn't know for sure. So she's living with that guilt. So I always encourage my clients, we need to have our last wishes somewhere on paper. We need to have that difficult conversation.
Yeah, and it's good to not make people guess, and you can only assume once you're either incapacitated or you pass away. So this completely avoidable. Talk to someone, make that decision before anything happens, and you're taking that kind of guilt or any type of strife that might happen away from your kids because you've decided beforehand.
Now, let me just take a minute. When we have a podcast interview, we're typically going to stream it on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. Not only can you see Cameron before he does the Photoshop on his hair, you also have the ability to ask some questions. So if you have some comments or would like to ask a question, throw it in the comments, and we may, if we have time, be able to ask Anthony.
Anthony, one of the things you mentioned was you mentioned 18 is kind of the time you should engage an estate planning attorney with some basic planning. That's probably the earliest that I think I've ever heard before, which I think is good advice, right? The sooner the better. You're getting good counsel, good mentorship along the way. As we kind of age, we do start to acquire assets, like you said. Are there certain assets that we shouldn't put into a trust or things that we should avoid?
Well, so I guess first off, right, there's two ways you can distribute your assets when you pass away. It's either through a will or a trust. Um, I'm a big fan of the revocable living trust just because it's private. You can avoid probate. You don't have to go to the court, ask permission, and you got some flexibility. As far as things that you can't put into a trust, life insurance, retirement accounts, generally are not going to be able to put in a trust. But instead of doing that, you name the beneficiary as your revocable living trust. That way it can flow through to it, unless you trust your kids or your heirs and you want to just make an outright distribution to them, but most of the time we use a revocable trust as a beneficiary.
And then as far as business goes, we typically, right, as business owners, we want to remain some level of privacy. What options are available to us there, right? One of the things I've often heard on social media, you see these clips often saying, hey, you know what, come engage with us and we'll guarantee you got 100% privacy or 100% protection. Is that true, or what is the reality there?
Yeah, so I feel like the asset protection side is oversold a lot. The truth of the matter is a revocable living trust doesn't give you asset protection. It's there to avoid probate. Now, it can give you some privacy, but you have to name the trust appropriately. So instead of the Brister Family Trust, we might have the Blue Sky Trust or something like that, where it doesn't designate you. But if you're signing on real estate or some other deals, most of the time you're going to be the trustee. So you're going to be signing on trustee on the deed, and you might give away who owns a trust anyways. Now, it's not 100% certain that if you're signing as a trustee, you own the trust, but it does give some kind of degree of linkage to the trust.
Perfect. We've got a couple of comments in here. One was a compliment. Anthony knows his stuff. I'm assuming he's talking about me.
That's your old,
right?
Yeah,
No,
I doubt it.
No, but
Yeah.
I'm sure it is. It is Anthony Brister. We did have a question here. I wasn't paying attention. This was 10 minutes ago. But he says, when should a trust be implemented in these cases? I don't recall. I don't know if we answered that. I don't recall what we were discussing 10 minutes ago.
Yeah, I think, you should implement the trust when you've got substantial assets.
How
So
do you define
a house,
substantial?
if you own a house or you've got marketable securities, some kind of assets that aren't just personal effects, that's when the trust probably should be implemented.
Now, the trust is a very broad term. There's a lot of different trusts, like you'd mentioned revocable, but there's also irrevocable. You mind explaining to Cameron what the difference is?
Yeah, yeah. So this actually causes a lot of confusion too. Um, a revocable trust, the purpose of that typically is to avoid probate. You put assets that you own during your life in that trust. An irrevocable trust, that is for estate planning purposes and typically asset protection. So, like I said, revocable trust doesn't give you any type of asset protection. Irrevocable trusts do. Revocable trust, as long as you're living and of sound mind, you can change that. And there's a lot of flexibility in the terms. There's not any flexibility in an irrevocable trust. So once you set the terms and put assets in there, there's no going back and changing terms or taking assets out of it.
Now, there are, as you'd mentioned, there are some. So I think one thing is clear, and I'm glad you mentioned it, that a living trust, which I think most people have, does not provide asset protection, right? It's more just to avoid probate. But as you mentioned, there are these trusts that do create asset protection. And we got a question here. If you have an asset protection trust, you need a living will.
So, yeah, well, a living will actually is different than a revocable living trust. So, a living will or a directive to physician is the pull the plug document. But if you're referring to a revocable living trust, typically you still do want that unless you have every single thing in the asset protection trust. Where I see most people having an asset protection trust is in states that have a low homestead protection rate. So Virginia, Nevada, Utah, things like that. If they respect what's called a domestic asset protection trust,
Mm-hmm.
you want to put your home in there because there's very low protection. I was just looking at a client in Virginia today. Their homestead exemption was like $5,000, and they had a couple 100,000 in equity, right? So in that case, you get in a lawsuit personally, anything above $5,000 of equity in your house could be at risk to a civil lawsuit.
That's crazy.
Now, could you expand or explain what the homestead is?
Yeah, so there's two different things when we're talking about homestead. One is the property tax rate, right? Typically, you file with that and you get a reduction in your property taxes because of homestead. But what
Mm,
we're talking about here is protection, homestead protection. So
okay.
I'm in Texas. Here in Texas, we have unlimited homestead. So what that means is as long as you're paying your property taxes and you're paying the IRS, no creditor can come in and take your equity away out of your home. So these states like Virginia, Utah, Nevada, things like that, that have a low threshold, something happens and that's in your personal name, someone can actually come and force you to sell your house.
Mm. Well, here's a good question from.
Lindley.
Thank you. What is the process to move assets into the trust?
So it depends on what kind of asset it is.
Mhm.
It involves retitling the assets. So for brokerage accounts, life insurance, things like that, bank accounts, you're typically changing beneficiaries or the owner of the trust or the account. For things like real estate, where it has title through a deed, you're actually drafting a new deed, doing a warranty deed from your personal name to the trust. For business assets, we do something called an assignment and consent, which transfers ownership from you to the trust.
So this is a document that an attorney would prepare?
Yes, yes.
Okay, perfect.
Anthony, you've mentioned a couple of times getting a trust set up. I think a common misconception is, hey, once I get this set up, I'm set. What type of engagement, or what is the reality of that?
Yeah, and I actually had a judge here in Houston, retired judge. She had a trust that was 20 years old, and she thought everything was good and in place, and she never actually went through and did the funding. And what funding is actually moving and retitling these assets. So drafting the trust and putting the provisions that you want in place is step one. The next step is actually changing beneficiaries and retitling accounts and transferring over deeds and business interests. If you don't do that, your trust is just a paperweight. So you're going to have to go through probate because it doesn't actually get transferred until you change title.
Man, that's interesting. The judge didn't even
Yeah.
take that action. Is that something that the attorney should be helping with, or is that something that kind of falls on the client?
So it depends on, I guess, your engagement letter, right? When I do trust with people, if we're going to go through the work, I make sure that we follow through on the funding. So we typically will include transferring your homestead, any business interest or outside properties and things are an outside hourly rate, but we give you instructions and follow up to make sure that that gets done because you're going to pay the money to do the trust. We don't want you having to go through probate on the back end because
Yeah.
you didn't follow up.
Corey, this is a great question I was about to ask. How often should you review your trust?
So after any major life event, right? So if you have kids, um, a spouse passes away, you you get into strife with children, things like that. As life changes, you want to review it, but typically every 2 to 3 years is a good time.
Mhm.
Don't just put it in your safe and lock it up. I've dealt with some older clients who had wills from the 1960s. So, you don't want to wait 40, 60 years. Every 2 to 3 years, bring it out, review it, make sure it says what you want it to say, and actually follow your wishes.
Great. Now, this is a great
Yeah.
question. Can you walk us through the theory of owning nothing but controlling everything? Does this actually work, or is this just a complex concept with some benefits?
So, I think that statement should be true. Your revocable trust should own everything to
Mhm.
avoid probate. Now, just because you have it in a revocable trust doesn't mean you get the asset protection, which I think can sometimes be misleading. So you need to layer in those other strategies like the charging order protection LLC. Um, I work also family limited partnerships, insurance. That's also another very easy but first level of protection you should be doing too.
Shall we pivot over? Because Anthony, with your firm is unique, where you not only handle some legal, but you guys also do some tax preparation planning. And what are a few top deductions that you see most business owners and investors missing?
Yeah, well, I'll say what's really important for tax planning, most of the time people want to do tax planning in April or after the year's done. The time to tax plan and what I do with my clients more take on an advisory role. We want to be meeting throughout the year strategically, talking about what's happening in your life, how can we be more tax efficient, what are you doing, things like that. As far as common deductions, I think people are scared to take, and every business owner now should definitely be taking, is a home office deduction, right? After COVID, just about every business owner I know does some kind of work, whether it's administrative, um, at their house, and they're using their house in some form or fashion. And there's a lot of old accountants that are just scared to death of taking the home office deduction. Yeah.
And that was me. I would, and kind of my saying was, because I'm so good with analogies, is just we don't, and now I'm forgetting my analogy, but something is we want to minimize the kind of windows that the IRS can can look through, and there's a lot of abuse in the home office deductions. So I've always felt the IRS was that it was another opportunity for them to kind of hone in and look at the other stuff you're doing. But so if things maybe changed after the lockdown.
Yeah, and what I say is for any deduction that we take, you need to be able to substantiate it and prove that it was a legitimate business expense. But again, I feel like I'll argue all day with the IRS. If we're taking a reasonable home office deduction, if you use a simplified method, 300 square feet, that's $1,500. Is it really worth the IRS's time to come and argue that? Just be reasonable, document, and have a set out space for it.
No, yeah. How do you document a home office?
So you want to have a set out space, right? The rule is it needs to be exclusive, but if you write your grandma an email in there, I think you'll be fine, right?
Mm-hmm.
You want to have a set out space. You want it like an office, right? So you want to do work there, but you just prove the set out space, how much square feet is in there. If you do the simplified method, it's $5 a square foot. The traditional method, you start prorating the use of the house, utilities, depreciation, all of that stuff, which does a little bit more work to it. But you just use prorate method of whatever square foot your office is compared to your total house.
Anthony, we may have a talk offline because the space I use for my office, we redid. We redid like the carpet and we redid the bathroom, and now I'm wondering.
Whoops.
Yeah, no, I didn't.
Take
Find
it.
it.
Take the deduction. It's
October.
there. They give it to you, right? The IRS gives that to you. It's a congressional grace. And again, I think after COVID, things have really changed, and it's to be expected. People use their house, and if you're using it for business, you're entitled to that deduction.
All right, Anthony. Okay.
We got a good question here by Andres. Anthony Andres is asking, can you talk about Section 162 and using permanent insurance as the funding vehicle where the business buys the policy on a key employee and you're able to deduct off taxes?
So 162 really is you're able to deduct what's ordinary and necessary for your business. So key man life insurance certainly can be qualified as ordinary and necessary. What I caution people with key man is if you get the deducted on the front end, you're not going to get that tax break on the back end. Typically, life insurance is federally income tax free upon the receipt, but if you deduct it on the front end, it's not going to be. So I caution that you're getting a deduction for a small amount. Typically, key man life insurance is term. So
doesn't have to be, Anthony.
it doesn't have to be. Most people do term, but again, you're getting a deduction at a smaller rate, where that death benefit ideally would be a lot larger.
Okay, Anthony, I have key person. Okay, on Cameron, but yeah. Interesting because then those premiums are larger. So okay, thanks for take on that. One common strategy people is that people will put their kids on payroll. Is that worth it?
Yeah, it is. So, I tell people there's no magic wand when you're talking about tax deductions. You can't just come to me and say, hey, I want to save money. You got to do the work, right? And that's actually one of my top 5 deductions is pay your family members, but they need to be actually doing something for your business. I'm a big fan of paying your kids. I feel like there's a lot of bad information out there. So there's a tax efficient way to do it. And then there's other ways where you're going to end up paying more in taxes. So when you have an S corporation, you operate out of a C corp or a partnership, you don't want to put your kids on payroll who are minors. Um, there's actually a loophole. If you actually pay your kids from a Schedule C business that both parents own, you can pay them up to 14,600 tax free and not subject to Social Security, Medicaid tax. Um, and you typically do that via a management fee from your operational business to the family management company. Now, once they're over 18, you need to ask, are they actually an employee or a contractor? So are you controlling the time that they spend working and where? If you do, they're probably an employee, so you want to put them on payroll. If not, and you got them on board of advisor type of position, or kind of a freelance thing, you can actually do a 1099, which is very effective because you're typically going to be at a higher bracket than your kids. So
Mhm.
you're going from 37% to a kid in college can get around 60 grand a year and be at a 6% tax bracket. So to the extent you're funding their life, get them involved in the business, make them work for it. You're not only teaching them work ethic, but you're also getting that tax break on the back end too.
Perfect. All right, Anthony. One thing that makes you unique is not only doing the legal and the tax, you're also using infinite banking.
Yeah.
So I love to hear, like, how did you get exposed to it in the first place?
So, I first heard about it a few years ago, kind of in passing, and I opened up a policy before going to law school, and I just kind of paid a little bit about it. My first job, actually, I was a life insurance agent, so I actually sold whole life for a little bit. Um, but not to digress, I had heard about it, never really discovered it until about October of last year. I came across Nash's book. Um, Also read What Would the Rockefellers Do, and a book by Caleb Williams,
Mhm.
and Asset. Um, Read that, started listening to podcast, looked at my old whole life policy, and I'm like, wait a second, I've got cash built up here. Um, and so that really kind of got me into it. And then studied business pretty much, the past decade. And I've seen how the rich use debt, typically with stocks or real estate, but seeing that you could actually use whole life insurance as a tool, and leverage it at a lot more an effective manner, and not have as many restrictions.
Yeah, I found that fascinating. They actually had a policy. Rarely does somebody have a policy, A, that's whole life, and then B, that's got cash value and designed appropriately. So, whoever set that up, I don't know if you set it up for yourself, but kudos to them.
Yeah, no, I mean, it was just kind of, I set it up and forgot about it. Really, I just kind of paid 50 extra bucks a month into
Yeah.
it. It wasn't anything crazy, but yeah, it was built up.
What was it? What was it about IBC that originally caught your attention? You mentioned kind of the leverage piece or the debt piece, but was there anything else specifically?
It was the leverage piece for sure, and being able to have my money do two things at once. Typically, you look at these millionaires, billionaires who've got big companies like Tesla, Facebook. They've been able to leverage their stock portfolio, but for your everyday person, most people aren't able to do that until they get substantial assets. Here, you can leverage what you put in. Typically, there's a little slower start,
Mhm.
but the cash value you've got, you can leverage it.
And we like to kind of talk about both sides. You've talked about some of the things you like about infinite banking. What are some things that you don't like about infinite banking? And feel free to be honest.
Yeah. Um, I think the biggest thing is there's a lot of misinformation out there about infinite banking
Mhm.
and whole life insurance in general, and comparing that to IULs and variable life insurance contracts. So I think there's a lot of bad information, and when you're trying to find resources, it's kind of hard to dig through what's good or what's not, especially when you've got Dave Ramsey, telling you whole life insurance is a scam. Um,
Yeah. So what are you, as you practicing it, and what are some things that you don't like about?
Yeah. Another downside, I think, is with these policies, you have to pay the premium each year versus where you're thinking about maybe a Roth IRA or something like that. You might not have to make a payment every single year. Another downside is that cash value and the cash you put up front those first couple of years, you're not able to use all of that. So it takes some time and a little bit of discipline to wait for it to be fully efficient. And sometimes, especially in this day and age, people want everything right now. So I think that time limitation and not having full access to it is a downside. But if you use a retirement account, you're not able to use it immediately anyways. But I think that's a big hurdle that people have to get over.
Well said, Anthony. If there's anybody out there that is maybe on the fence and listening to this conversation, and they're trying to decide whether they want to do IBC or not, is there anything that you'd share with them?
Yeah, I'd say go read Nelson Nash's book first off, and then do the math. One thing that I did really was put the policies up, look at loan rates and versus using it to invest and paying it back. Something I was surprised at, that you can make money paying 5% while earning 4% over a long period of time. Um, and the math speaks for itself, even though it doesn't seem like it
Right.
on
Yeah.
its face.
Now, Anthony, do you mind sharing how you've used your policy?
Yeah. So I've done it a few different ways. First, I just bought a house in East Texas with my brother that right now we're living in it when I go down for my other practice, but we plan on renting that out. Um, I've used it when I need to pay somebody in a business and cash flow is a little bit tight. I've also used it trading options, so selling puts and covered calls. Right now, I'm looking at buying another rental property and also doing some hard money lending.
Oh, nice.
Nice.
Nice. Well, Anthony, do you mind sharing? Let's talk a little bit about your practice. And we've kind of talked in a broad area of how you help people, but you might want to give us a little more detail of what you do and how you help people.
Yeah, so like I said, really, my goal is to be an advisor and not just a tax preparer or someone you come to get an LLC formed. So I'm taking the approach of I want clients that we want to meet regularly, and we want to be talking about your tax plan, your estate plan, your insurance needs, what your financial plan is, what kind of debt you're taking on, different life events and things like that. And so really it's meeting with clients regularly, whether it's monthly or quarterly, and then also offering the a la carte services that come along with it.
And what's the best way for somebody to get a hold of you, Anthony?
So we've got a discovery call that we do for all of our initial clients. You can go to our website, bristertaxlaw.com, schedule a discovery call. One of my paralegals handles that. Really, we want to see, one, if you're a good fit, whether you're a jerk or not, too. We want to work with good
Sorry, Cam.
people. And if you're rude to my paralegal, it's probably not going to be a good fit.
Now, is there a fee for the discovery call?
There's no fee for the discovery call. And then from there, we'll kind of vet out what you're looking for. Typically, we do a comprehensive consult. So we'll go through, talk about your estate plan, review documents, and come up with a tax plan. That typically is a fee. Now, if you want an a la carte type of service, just let them know in the discovery call, and that's case by case.
Perfect.
Awesome, Anthony. Hey, man, there's a couple of things I heard in there that I really appreciate from your approach. One is kind of instead of more of a transactional business approach, right? You're out there trying to build a relationship with clients for kind of long-term planning. And then also the other thing I heard in there was the tax side of it and being proactive, right? And planning on the tax side is not very often offered. So two big things that I see kind of set you apart from everybody else.
Yeah, and the whole thing with the advisory service is I don't want to be overwhelmed doing 1,000 returns and not being able to answer phone calls. So it is relationship based. One thing that happens a lot of times, people go pay an attorney, come up with an expensive plan, and then they'll get the plan and say good luck, right?
Yeah.
So we're here to kind of be your quarterback and make sure that the implementation actually gets through and you're doing what we're coming up with.
I will say, Anthony, I'm a little disappointed in our podcast here. I even talked to you beforehand, like we got a theme of making fun of Cameron, and I didn't hear anything. And to be honest,
no zingers from me. I'm sorry.
I don't know. I think I even gave you a compliment.
You did,
man.
you did.
I am getting too soft to my old age.
Dude,
I got to get.
We
got to get back to the basics.
You rattled me early. I didn't know what to do. I got a compliment, and I'm like, "Whoa, what's happening here?"
That was like a jab, waiting for that hook. Okay.
Anthony, thanks so much, man. Really appreciate your time coming on here, filling some live questions on the spot. Well done. And again, we'll make sure that we get the link to your website in the show notes. That way everybody can reach out to you and get their situation addressed with you.
Awesome. Well, thanks for having me, guys.
Our pleasure, Anthony, and go make it a fantastic day.
Take care.
If you like this video, I know you're like this one. And if you want to learn how investors use infinite banking to increase their returns and lower their taxes, check this out. And if you have some questions and want to see if infinite banking is for you, hop on a discovery call with us. Link for that will be in the description.